Former President Donald Trump was indicted today for trying to overturn his loss to Joe Biden.
We have to win in November, or we're not going to have Pennsylvania. They'll change the name. They're going to change the name of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvanians have a unique role with democracy and freedom. We have seen Pennsylvanians rise up at the ballot box.
The work of making this world resemble one that you would prefer to live in is a lunch pail job.
Hi, welcome to the Keystone Reckoning podcast. I'm your host, Jesse White. Joining me today is my guest, Rianna Czech, who's the candidate for the 50th state Senate seat of Pennsylvania. Rianna, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me, Jesse.
Okay, so Rianna, I do this with all candidates. Give me the 30 to 60 second background of yourself and kind of how you got to where you are right now.
I was born and raised in Corey, Pennsylvania. I grew up on a farm and worked in a garage and on cars. I ended up joining the Pennsylvania Army National Guard and spent 8 years in the Army National Guard, during which time I got my degree in political science from Edinburgh University. After I got done with Edinburgh, I was looking into law schools, and then the pandemic hit, and so I started working at Walmart. After that went through, and I just saw the hassles of trying to work in the corporate life and seeing how downtrodden people were and how unhappy people were with politics. The 2020 election, after dealing with all that, I went down to my local polling place, and I was actually afraid to be there just because of who I was. I was afraid somebody was going to try and fight me or stop me from voting, and just because of the political landscape that we had. And that was, at that point, I said it was enough. I mean, I needed to make a change. So I got together a group of advisors, and we figured out that the best chance with me living in a very rural area would be to go for the numbers. So I looked at some of the candidates, and I decided to go up against Michelle Brooks for state Senate, kind of pulling an AOC here. But I think with my background in political science and all of the things that I've done throughout my life, my life is my experience, and the things that she's been doing just aren't up to par to a state senator. And I think I can do a good job in changing that.
It's interesting, and we're going to get to Michelle here shortly, but I want to stay focused on you for a couple of minutes. So you've never held any political office before, correct?
No, I haven't.
And how old are you?
I am 27 years old.
27. And because we're recording audio, but we have video so we can see each other, and you look young. And that's great. I mean, I was 26 when I was first elected to the state house, so I can, I love young candidates with energy. That's a compliment more than anything else. I guess my question is that, well, first of all, are you the only one that's planning on running on the Democratic side?
At the current moment, I have worked with all of the county Democratic parties. I've been, all the summers to the fairs and everything. And, typically there would be a name out by now saying that they were running, and nobody seems to think that I'm going to have a primary challenger. So it's looking okay for me to be going into the general.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you're right. I mean, at this point of the calendar, if nobody's announced or is sniffing around, then odds are there probably weren't. I just wasn't sure what the landscape was up there, to know if you had a clear path or whatever. So the other thing that I think makes you a defining candidate is the fact that you are transgender.
Yes.
And that's something you didn't mention in your initial, and I think you kind of alluded to it in the, kind of who you were and the, the way you were being perceived in the, kind of this rough political landscape. But, you're trying to become Pennsylvania's first trans state senator.
Yes.
There's somebody else running in the 182nd House race to be who's also trans. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, and I say this because I looked at the difference between the districts, because that's Brian Sims' current district, generally viewed as the most liberal district in Pennsylvania, right? You're running in the 50th state Senate district, which is one of the most conservative in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And I looked at the numbers, and it's it's basically like a 2-to-1 Republican district.
Yeah.
Give or take, but it's actually and it actually performs better than for Republicans, better than the registration. Not by a lot, but by a little.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, how the hell is this going to work? Kind of what's the plan, and I'm not saying that is to imply you don't have one, but I mean, what is the way you're going to approach this in terms of how you're going to try to win over voters that demographically won't be inclined to vote for a Democrat, let alone someone who's a trailblazing Democrat?
Well, see, here's the thing, and I appreciate the question. It's a great question, and I get asked it a lot. We do have 52,000 registered Democrats, give or take, whereas we have 72,000 registered Republicans. But the numbers that we don't take into account for are the 19,000 independent voters. That would put us on par with registration with the Republican Party. Now, I'm not saying that I can get all of the Democrats that are currently registered out and all of the independents that are currently registered. But what I can do, and this is why I allude to it. I don't outright run on my platform on the fact that I'm the first transgender state senator or I want to be the first transgender state senator for Pennsylvania, is because that's only a small fraction of who I am.
Sure.
I go out and it really alludes to my character that when I go out on the campaign trail, I talk to everybody. I mean, even in my own community, I talk to people and they say, hey, what makes you better than our current representative? And I look at them and I say, well, I'm here. I mean, I live in a borough, it's not even like I'm in one of the major quote unquote cities of the 50th district.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm out there knocking on their doors. I'm asking them. And I have heard more times than I can count. I have voted Republican my entire life, but guess what? You have my vote this upcoming election cycle.
Real quick, for those that are listening that aren't familiar, can you give everybody a breakdown of what the 50th looks like demographically or geographically?
Geographically, okay, so my district encompasses actually the bottom part of Erie County. At least at the current moment, we are working through a redistricting right now, so it might change. The most I've heard currently is that I'm looking like I'm going to lose the Erie County section, and then it's just going to gain more of a geographical area, but I still should be within the 50th. As far as that goes, I have the count or two counties directly below Erie County, and then a portion of Warren County, which is where Pennsylvania and New York kind of make the L on the northwestern side. So it's just it almost looks like the best way I describe it is if you're looking at my district map, it almost looks like Africa running down through, and then it comes slightly down a little bit right by Grove City area by 80, where 79 and 80 meet. And then it just shoots straight back up and cuts like 4 townships off in Warren County, and that's the extent of it.
And the other two counties are what, Mercer and Lawrence?
No, I have Erie, parts of Erie, parts of Warren, Crawford County, and Mercer County.
Crawford. Okay, sorry. I'm looking at a map, but it doesn't have the counties on it. So okay. So yeah, so it's definitely a rural district, and it's a district that is, with rural districts in general, they're tough because, the ability to get out and knock all the doors and to make those contacts it's just difficult the bigger the district is. But I want to go back to something you said about kind of your approach and your platform, and that you're running as and please tell me if I'm reading this wrong. You're running as a candidate who happens to be trans, not a trans candidate. Is that correct?
My thing is, I don't specifically define myself by one subset of who I am. I mean, I know there are a lot of people who express their gender identity as a large portion of who they are, but I spent 8 years in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. I have worked in almost every field known to man. I grew up on a farm. I literally work on cars currently. I've been in anywhere from plastic shops to being a MIG-TIG arc welder. I have done all of these different things, and so being transgender is a portion of it, but it's not my shining characteristic, if that makes any sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And I think that from my own personal point of view, I think that's the right approach. I think that, a lot of times we, as the Democratic Party, I think we get stuck on ideas of we have to find candidates that fit the mold or check these boxes. And a lot of times when you do that, and, ones you see a lot are, oh, we need candidates that are veterans, right? Well, and you happen to be a veteran, but, they may say we need candidates that are veterans, or, we need candidates that are women, or we need candidates that are whatever they may be. But instead of saying we need to find the best candidate, it's we need to find a candidate who is blank. And I think a lot of times when that happens, you see a lot of square pegs going into round holes.
And I think that's a fair point. I mean, I am an avid listener of your show, and the episode you put in right before this one, I think, you were talking about the candidate specifically not doing everything in their power to get elected.
Right.
And I think that's trying to take that round peg and put it in a square hole.
Yeah, absolutely.
I as somebody who's running to be an elected official, it's my job and my responsibility to serve the people, and that's what I'm going to do to the best of my ability.
Right. And so let's talk about that for a minute, because one of the things that you seem pretty eager to talk about, in terms of not just us talking now, but in the stuff I've looked up is, you want to talk about Michelle Brooks and her record. And I've always said, and I'm not the only one, but it's a common thing that most often elections are referendums on the incumbent, right? So as a challenger, you need to make voters realize that they need to vote the incumbent out of office and then convince them to vote for you. And I think a lot of times what you see is challengers skip the first part and go to the second part. And what you have is people will say, oh, well, you're nice, you're a good person, whatever. But no, you haven't given me a reason not to vote for the incumbent. So I'm going to vote for the incumbent. And, so I think you've got the right approach there, which is you need to make that case. And it's interesting. I'm interested as to hear your perspective as a constituent, because I was elected into the state house with Michelle Brooks. We were in the same freshman class in 2007. And I seem to remember her being not as conservative as she is now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a combination of adapting to change there was a point after the Tea Party wave in 2010 where Republicans in the assembly had to basically adapt or die.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They had to get more conservative or they were going to get primaried out of office. And it feels like she made that pivot. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on her as a state senator and kind of the areas, if when you're at a door and you can, say three things about her to win a voter over, what would those three things be?
Well, and I would like to preface this by saying, she is somebody who actually did something, and I cannot commend her enough for that. However,
how do you mean? What did she do?
Running for office. She went out and as a woman in a primarily, male assembly ran to represent her people. And I commend her on that. I really do. However, we're not dealing with being a commissioner anymore. We're dealing with 250,000 constituents. And a lot of her policy issues are very focused. And when it comes to constituent relations, as I'm walking through my community, I hear, I tried to reach out to her in her office and, I never got heard or I never got anything back. Or, she never even bothers to come check on the rest of her district that is primarily rural. And she focuses on Mercer, Greenville, Grove City, Meadville, all these big cities, but she won't step foot into a borough to see the issues that they're having there. And, some of her policy ideas, a lot of the things she's been trying to push is, Lyme disease reform. Like, that's great for people who deal with Lyme disease. And don't get me wrong, up in this area, there are ticks everywhere, but not every tick has Lyme disease and not every person has a tick, where you could generally solve this issue by dealing with a healthcare crisis. Somebody I went to high school with recently went into the hospital with, oh God, I'm trying to remember the name of it. essentially a high blood sugar for being a diabetic. My mom's a diabetic, and she's told me this many times, like the name of it, and it always eludes me.
I'm diabetic too, so yeah, it's you could be. I mean, if you were
It's an
like
extreme
hypoglycemic,
case. Yeah,
okay.
it was like an extreme case, and she ended up dying from it.
Oh my God.
Somebody who was 2 years younger than me, and we're focusing on Lyme disease, and I can almost see that, like, it was probably one of a few things. Like, she couldn't get enough insulin to maintain her, and for someone being a type 1 diabetic, that's a death sentence.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who need mental health care. There are people who need just, access or accessibility to doctors. Covering and fixing the healthcare system instead of focusing directly on Lyme disease is a part of being a senator to 250,000 constituents.
Yeah, and that's you get that a lot, and it's tough because sometimes you'll find these kind of niche issues, and you're like, oh, I want to do something about that, and then people come back and they're like, yeah, but what about this and what about that? But I think there's a parallel to be drawn here, particularly when I read that your vaccination rate for COVID in your district is one of the lowest in the state, right?
All four of our counties, minus Erie. If you take the district or the bottom of Erie County that is in her district and take those numbers, Crawford County. Actually, I do have these numbers. Give me 1 second. I did prepare for this because this is one of the points I wanted to make. Was that
is she like an anti-vaxxer?
Here's the issue. So the Warren Times News put out an article about her pushing for no mandates for school age children. And now I get that typically that's a board or excuse me, the Board of Education's call as to immunizations and what types of immunizations they need.
Right.
However, the bill specifically is structured. It is Senate Bill 22. Let me see here. Anyway, it was just passed through the Education Committee, but specifically saying that children will not ever be mandated to get the vaccine. Which, at this point, we already know Governor Wolf is going to veto that. And it's to the point where we're saying, like, are we really wasting time trying to push this legislation? Isn't going to get passed when you could be dealing with your declining infrastructure of your school buildings or all these things. But the full vaccination by the counties here is Crawford County is at a 42.11%. Mercer County is a 44.56%, and Warren County is 40.7%. These are the lowest, some of the lowest in the state, yet she is the head of the Health and Human Services Committee.
Of course she is. And I'm assuming, I couldn't find anything, but correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen anything with her directing, urging her constituents to come out and get vaccinated or anything like that.
I have not either.
It feels like the vibe I got was that she's not like on the full-blown crazy side,
no,
where the Mastrianos are, but she's also virtue signaling to those people, by doing nothing on certain things and doing other things like you mentioned about the anti-mandate or whatever. She's trying to have it both ways. Is the vibe that I picked up.
Well, and also she's on the edge, or I'm not sure she's the head of, or if she's just on the Education Committee, but she's on that too. And she's basically not, we've had a school board in this district that I've been following very closely that has spent the last, I want to say, 11 sessions talking about banning critical race theory instead of dealing with the issues of their declining infrastructure, their students not getting the education that they deserve, and telling teachers that they can't go to conferences because they might learn about indoctrination, when in actuality they're presenting on behalf of a social learning program.
So so let me ask you this then. How do you as a candidate combat that? The critical race theory thing? And because 2020 it was defund the police, and that was the whistle that that people heard. This year, it's going to be critical race theory. I mean, these past school board elections were clearly a proving ground for that, and as a parent, my kids are in kindergarten and first grade. So I'm now just coming into that part of this, of advocacy and everything else. I went to my first school board meeting, was utterly astonished about mask policies and everything. I mean, it was a rude awakening. And I could only imagine if critical race theory came up in that, in my district or wherever else, people lose their minds because, and it's a great boogeyman because people don't know what it is. It just sounds bad because they make it sound bad. So how are you as a candidate going to combat that when she starts talking about, critical race theory and how it's coming and she's going to stand up against it?
Well, and it's actually very simple, and it's probably the biggest cliche in the books, but it's facts. Critical race theory is not and has not been taught in our elementary or high schools ever. It is a college level course that teaches about the legal, how the legal system has been structured towards, creating laws that suppress African American people. And I don't even believe that's like a bachelor level course. I believe that's even like into the master's levels courses. But it's never been a thing. But there's always going to be a boogeyman. There's always going to be something. It's either defund the police, or it's going to be because they can't stick to a stance that empowers the people. They want them frightened and afraid and standing against their own morals because a Democrat is saying that they're going to teach their kids to hate themselves, by teaching them critical race theory. Or like even over the summer, I dealt with an anti-LGBT display by a school board member. Like I went out and supported those kids because it was the right thing to do, but two, like I wanted to show them that they're not alone in this. But if they want to stop this drain that's happening, where people are leaving these districts and these counties in droves, they need to change their mentality and they need to change their rhetoric. Because to have a place where you are literally taking people that are in this district, that live in this district, that grew up in this district, that are LGBT, that are African American, that are Asian, that are whatever, and you're telling them that they don't belong, and then they sit there and say, well, where's our population going and why aren't we getting the money for this? Quit sending people away. Quit scaring them like they're going to be murdered in the streets. Like, come on.
And it should be noted that I was looking at the district. This isn't the 50th is an overwhelmingly white district. 3.5% black, 0.8% Hispanic. So, I mean, it's it's lily white. And I was wondering, and this is just something I've been thinking about lately, and I want to get people's opinions on. When you talk about critical race theory, unlike defund the police, where it was a situation where they were talking about an issue that was just like the worst branding campaign of all time, right? They were talking about one thing and it got turned into something else. Critical race theory, for people like you and I who know what it is and know it's not being taught in our schools, I almost wonder if the Democratic Party shouldn't say, you know what, we're opposed to critical race theory being taught in our schools too.
There was a school board member that actually took that stance. It's like, because he literally said, I'm opposed to it too, because it's not being taught in our schools.
Right. It almost feels, and this is where, because I feel like sometimes this is where we as Democrats we trip ourselves up. We spend so much energy explaining, trying to explain what it really is and this, that. Now we like own it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Whereas if we were just like, you know what, as a party, we are also opposed to teaching critical race theory in schools because it's not something that's appropriate to teach at lower levels, in lower levels of education. And you just take it away. You take the issue away.
Well, but here's the thing. In saying that they want to ban critical race theory, you are opening Pandora's box, because if you can't even define what critical race theory is, teachers are going to be sitting in their classrooms afraid to teach about Martin Luther King Jr. They're going to be afraid to teach about, the Civil War. They're going to be afraid to teach because they don't know what encompasses under critical race theory, because the people who banned it don't even know what it means.
Right. And that's kind of the trickiness, but part of me thinks if we just say, okay, fine, we're cool with banning it too. and there's no, now that there's no opposition, there's no wedge, there's no, there's no group of people getting all riled up about it. Do they just abandon it and move on to something else? I don't know. But it feels like it feels like a trap, right? It just feels like a trap. And they're so good at this. The Republicans are so excellent at this in getting, it's a thing because we allow it to be a thing.
I mean,
whereas I don't know what they would do if we were just like, all right, yeah, we're with you, ban it.
Okay, let's just go. Let's do this.
What would they do?
There always has to be a boogeyman. It was communism, then it was, just there's always one after another, because that's their tactic. And you know what? The sad part is it works. It really does.
Well, sure it does.
You terrify your constituents and make it so you're the only one who can solve their issues. Of course they're going to vote for you.
Right. Well, and the other thing is there's a huge disconnect between what actually happens in the Capitol and what comes out of the Capitol, right? Especially where I'm assuming, you probably have a few Democrat reps in your district.
Ryan Bizzarro, he's up in Erie. He's not quite the same.
For the most part, the state senator, by virtue of their press releases and their email blasts and everything, they're kind of setting the agenda in terms of what constituents hear, they can. Republicans are very good at doing very bad things and making them sound very.
I mean, it also doesn't help that we have Mike Kelly over this area, so that's just like a cherry on top. But
right, I mean, so it's what I call the red fog, right? When there's just really. Republicans are the only ones putting the, doing the messaging out there. And because it's, quote, official messaging, it gets in the paper, it gets, it gets the press. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm thinking about specifically challenges that you're going to face, you're not, I don't think you're going to face critical race theory as much as they're going to hit you with, banning trans participation in student athletics. Because there's a bill out there for that right now.
Aware.
They're going to hit you with trans bathrooms, right? I mean, they hit me with that. I got the mailer of and we had never even voted on it. I'd never even given a position, but it was because I was a Democrat. There was, Jesse White wants to let, people into your daughter's bathroom at school. And it was terrifying. And I'm like, I do? When the hell did that happen?
Right.
But I mean,
can I tell you a little secret here?
Please.
If we're talking, and this is coming from somebody who is transgender, if we're talking about sports, kids don't give a shit. They just want to play sports. And if we're talking about a bathroom bill, oh my God, I want to go in and pee. You are more statistically, you are more likely to be assaulted by an elected official, meaning a congressman, a state representative, than you are a transgender person. Statistically, on record.
And as somebody that knows a lot of those state representatives and senators, I'd say, yeah, that's definitely the case.
Exactly. And I'm sitting here, when I go into the bathroom, you want to know, I want to pee. I want to pee. I want to go to the bathroom and leave. Mm-hmm. Wash my hands and leave. I don't.
Right.
You want to paint a boogeyman, and that's all it is. And until somebody can openly say it, then.
Right. And it feels, and I like your approach there because you're very, I like the matter of factness, right? You're like, look, you're not trying to obfuscate or apologize or do whatever. You're like, it is what it is. And, but I'm sure that that's what they're going to, it's a way to force you to talk about being trans because then they can define you, I mean, that's just what they're going to do because they can't, the problem is, politically, they can't attack you directly for being trans, right? I mean, that's a little, no, right? I mean, it'll be a whisper campaign and, whatever, and obviously you're not denying it and it's nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed about or have to explain. It's just who you are. But in that district, they're going to try to paint you as different, but they can't come right out and say it directly. So what they'll do is talk about a bunch of issues relating to trans rights or whatever, and then try to force you to own those issues, and then that's how they'll come and get you.
And then I'll just look at them and say, "This is my one-liner for most trans issues that they're going to propose to me." Is ultimately, this comes down to you are curious about what is in my pants, and if you want to start talking about real politics here, I'd be glad to do that. But if this is only going to be a smear campaign about trying to figure out what's going on downstairs, I'm out of here.
That should be your slogan. Like, it's about what's up here, not down there. Like, like with you pointing to your brain.
I mean, I was literally given the best political last name ever. Like, think about the messaging. I have go out and check the box.
Right.
Like I have a check mark in my campaign logo. Come on, like.
Yeah, it's just going to be fascinating because. So let me ask you a question. This is something that I've struggled with a little bit. Not, and I say that more in a kind of systemic way than a personal experience way. But what do you say? And there's no right or wrong answer here. But what do you say to people that are curious about your experiences as a trans person? And let me frame that a little bit because it's a very broad question. And I assure you, I'm not going to ask you any personal questions, but to people that maybe you're out meeting on the campaign trail, right? And you're just meeting people and networking or whatever, and you meet people that are genuinely curious, but not in a negative way, right?
I understand what you're coming from.
Yeah,
like,
please answer this.
I don't, and I'm not going to get like all personal and public on
I don't want
the
you
podcast because like that's
right. I know,
but if somebody genuinely wants to come up to me, and this is what I tell every single individual that asks me, I don't care how you say it as long as you don't say it with malice. If you're coming at me with genuine curiosity, I will tell you because I would rather you ask me than assume or Google.
Okay, now see that's so fascinating because I've run into people and had experiences where, and it wasn't necessarily with being transgender, but it was other issues, other personal social issues, things like that, where it was basically you don't get to ask me about me, and my response was, and this was to put it in context, there was a group of us that were co-supervisors, like we were all colleagues, and we were all we were going to be managing large groups of people, and it was a political organization. Mm-hmm. And this was in a supervisors type meeting, and we were talking about different things, and the question was, well, if those things come up, how do you deal with it as a supervisor? And there was a lot of, I don't have to explain myself to you and these sorts of things. And the thing I struggled with was saying, look, I don't want you to explain yourself to me. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm not asking you anything personal, but if there are people that genuinely want to be allies, I think that's the key. And I think it's kind of what you were saying about a lack of malice. If I want to be an ally, but I need to know how to be a better ally, is it offensive to ask that question or not?
See, now here's my one thing. I hate that this is such honestly a political issue. Because it shouldn't be. Like, my gender identity is my own. The only reason why I have to be comfortable talking about it, whereas say like the next person doesn't, is because I'm going to be a very political and open person. Like, I'm going to be out on the main stage. But I do wish that, coming to some of my, brothers and sisters in the LGBTQIA, there are genuine people around here. I've gone to local businesses. I've gone to, this is one of the things that I started out my campaign with. There's a light up sign out in a city or a township out here that was directly pointed at Dr. Levine, and using very crude things like that. And I spoke out and I said, I actually called out the people that are around there that were just sitting silently. I'm like, this is a local, well-known business person that is putting the sign up here. And if you don't say anything against it, it's basically like you're being complicit and agreeing. Why do you think there are so many of us that are afraid to walk out and about and be our true selves? And that there are so many people that even in today's day and age, you have like 50 or 60-year-olds that are just now coming out, because it's not that they, it's a fad or a fashion trend. It's that it is physically safe for them to do so. And the more open,
especially for people that are living in rural areas, absolutely. I hear that 110%.
And, it is very difficult being in such a red district, especially with it being such a hot button topic. Because I will have people who will immediately, they'll when I'm doing my cold calling and stuff like that, they'll immediately be like, "Oh, you're that person," and hang up the phone. Or they'll just want to scream at me and yell at me. I'll be like, "All right, have a nice day." Like, but there'll be people who will just kind of like give me that look, but are still kind of on the hook. You know what I mean? And then I'll just be like, "Have you ever met somebody who is transgender?" And 9 times out of 10, it is a resounding no. And the 1 out of 10 times, the reason why they're looking at me like that is because it was or it was a yes, and they had a horrible experience.
And yeah, and that's really the struggle. I've seen being just out, on different campaigns and out in different communities all over the place. Is I think especially with trans individuals, because I think it's a newer idea to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And because, it's like you said, people are afraid. There, a lot fewer people are coming out and being very unabashed and say, "No, this is who I am." And it's who I am. Who cares? It's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's this fear of people that want to be allies, but don't know how to be. They don't want to offend anybody, but because of that, it forces them into this place where they kind of don't know what to do. It's like, okay, do I just ignore it? Is that rude?
Okay.
Do I ask you about it? Like, does that make a little bit more sense? I mean, that's kind of where it is.
I have a term.
Yes,
for this.
please.
It's called awkward limbo.
I love it. Okay, explain to me awkward limbo.
Okay, so awkward limbo is, how you're doing your limbo thing, and like as it goes down and down and down, it gets more and more uncomfortable for you to get under the bar. So typically, as you're getting deeper into a conversation, you say as a heterosexual cisgendered male are trying to walk around the topic you are trying to ask about because you are so afraid of political correctness that that you are doing it. So every time that you are avoiding the actual question that you want to ask, that bar is going lower and lower, and it's kind of squishing them down. Like they're like, "Okay, like where are we getting with this?" Like because at that time, and the only thing, and this is coming from my perspective, I'm not speaking for everybody, but like the only thing that's going on in my mind is, where's this conversation going? Am I about to be into like a fight or flight thing? Am I about to be like making a new best friend? Am I about to be like, do I need to call the cops and or pull out my cell phone and start recording this shit because it's about to be funny as hell? Like,
you're right. And here's the thing. You're absolutely right. And I guess the problem that I've run into is, and I guess this is the danger of trying to, and I think we all do it without even realizing it, is, of the danger of painting everybody with the same broad brush, right? Not all trans people think the same and feel the same. Not all, straight people think the same. I mean, we're all people, right? We're all individual people. And you could take 5 people that on paper are very similar, line them up next to one another, and they're all completely different in the way they perceive things, right? And I think the problem that we run into is, like you said, it's political correctness. I think it's political correct. I think there's a difference between political correctness for the sake of being politically correct and political correctness in terms of being respectful and not wanting to be disrespectful.
and that's
right?
why I say, ask me how you want to ask me, because if you don't know how to ask me, you're going to be playing that. You're going to get into that whole limbo thing because you're going to try and walk around the words that you're trying to use. I would rather you say, just straight up be like, "What is in your pants?" Or like, "Are you planning on having a surgery or not?" And as long as there wasn't like an intent of being rude or mean or anything like that, I know the words that you were trying to use before you tried to go into that limbo thing. Now, this is just me. Now, I'm not again, not speaking for all.
Right, and that's the point. I mean, that's you versus somebody else. And by the way, the questions I'm talking about are not necessarily even anything remotely that personal. It would be more along the lines of, what is it like being a trans person running for office? How does that impact, like the more general, like inbound questions as an elected, as a candidate that you would be, that you would be answering. But yeah, it's just,
no, but
it's fascinating.
You only know the words that you know.
Right.
And here's the thing. And I want to say this to anyone who out there that is a part of the LGBTQI community is like, yeah, there is so much research out there that, we as, the LGBTQI would love for you to go look at and just kind of get a general sense. But like, if the words aren't there, the words aren't there. So like to to this community is like, understand that there's a whole lot of people out there, especially in this area, that do not understand or don't have the words to say it. Because 9 times out of 10, when somebody does come at me with like that brutal honesty, but like without malice, I will tell them the words that like they should use, because that is educating them in a very simple way to be like, okay, so I get what you're trying to say. This is what you should have said, and then I will answer their question.
And you just actually, you literally just answered my next question was, as someone who is, going to be out in the community and talking to a ton of people and everything, and, all different kinds of people, like you said, that you don't, when you knock on that door, you don't know what you're dealing with. Right. Mm-hmm. And, the fact that it sounds like you're kind of looking at not as a responsibility, but as an opportunity to maybe educate people who want to be educated in a very limited way. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, it is, but at the end of this election, I am either going to win or I am going to lose big so I can change the conversation. Because that's what needs to happen, is because it's like who in this area, like we have Dr. Tyler Titus, but they are up in Erie, and that is still a very like blue purplish area. But like I wish you could, I could read and show you some of the emails that I get from people who are in this community that live right here, email, messenger, that say that it is so great that I am doing what I'm doing and that I need to keep it up, because at the very least, I am changing this conversation to say, hey, we are here. Like it's not like this non-existent thought of like, oh, let's ban LGBT books, or hey, let's ban anything that's different, or let's make legislation that makes kids feel like they're singled out or that they can't even use the bathroom at school. Like it's not about that. It's about changing the conversation to say that, hey, we're here in every aspect, and you're going to have to deal with that, because whether you believe it or not, I'm here and I'm going to change the conversation to make it so you have to hear us.
And you're right, because it's the simple age old thing of, when you put a face on something, it's a lot harder to hate, right? It's a lot easier to hate something in the abstract than it is to hate it when it's a person standing in front of you.
Well,
right? Or be ignorant of it.
Well, yeah, but you also brought up like Brian Sims and Malcolm Kenyatta. It's easy for them to be openly gay down in their liberal areas, but like when you don't know somebody's personal life, like your neighbor could be that, that single guy that lives next door could be gay. The 2 women roommates that you think are roommates could be lesbians. It's easy for those types of people to just live, and for someone like me, you could be living next to somebody who's gay, who's bisexual, who's a lesbian or whatever, and never know it. You could live your entire lives and never know it. But the second you live next to somebody who is non-binary, queer, trans, gender non-conforming, you're gonna know it, because they are going to look different. And that's what people are thinking, is like, that's why these trans bathroom bills, that's why these trans sports bills are so crucial, is because they're banking on people thinking like, oh, they're not in my community, so I can say whatever I want. Well, guess what? I am in your community. And if you want to say it to my face, go right ahead, but you're gonna have to deal with a rebuttal.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And, one of the things that I think applies to your area, and I think it applies to a lot of areas, is, we tend to look at, and I'm just talking about Democrat, Republican now. We tend to look at areas as, like, oh, it's a red district, therefore, everybody's ultra conservative. But like you said, there are still a ton of, Democrats there. So, this idea that, but what happens, I think, is, and I'm sure you've run into this when you've knocked on doors, people that live in these communities, because Democrats don't do very well politically, they think that everybody around them, like you'll knock on a door and they'll be like, I'm the only Democrat on this street. And you're like, well, no, actually there are Democrats there, and there. And they're like, really? And they're like, they don't even know who the Democrats in their neighborhood are, because they're like, they're surrounded by, Trump flags and craziness. And they're like, you know what, I'm just gonna go into a shell and do my thing. And, and those are probably the people that are sending you the messages and the emails and everything.
You would be surprised at how many people like walk up to me and be like, I support you for what you're doing in like a whispered tone. Like, don't get me wrong. Like I was out at the county fairs. I was seeing people. I had the hecklers. I had the, what have you. But I had so many more meaningful conversations. And honestly, whenever I go out into a community, I just say I'm running for state senate. And I just start asking them, what do you need for the community? And by the time that we get into like, say, 5 minutes into the conversation, they'll be like, oh, hey, are you a Republican or a Democrat? I'm like, I'm a Democrat, but is that going to stop me from solving your problems? You're my constituent if I get elected, you know? Because I'm not here to just vote for Democrats. I am not here to just vote or, vote against Republicans. I'm here to serve the people of my district. And that's simply put, I have Republicans, I have Democrats, I have independents, and I have non-political people. But guess what? If they need me, that's what I'm going to be there for.
Okay, so let's take a step back and talk about the political nuts and bolts of this. One of the things as a consultant I always do when I'm looking at a race, kind of what's the path to victory, right? What is your path to victory?
So, okay, can we fine tune that a little bit?
Sure. What has to happen in order for you to win? Let me rephrase it.
Well, obviously, first I have to get on the ballot. That's the basics.
Well, let's assume that we're in the general and it's you versus Michelle, and it's the day after the primary. What needs to happen on your end and what needs to happen on her end in order for you to win?
At the current moment, I'm gonna be knocking on every door. I don't care if you have a Trump flag. I don't care if you have a don't get me wrong. Like, don't, if it's like Trump everywhere, I might be like, we might skip that house.
Right.
But I'm gonna be knocking on every door. I'm gonna be going to boroughs, the smaller townships. I'm gonna be going to their meetings. I'm gonna be talking to these people. I'm gonna see what they need, because that's really what it is. It's because for so long people have been absentee. They think they can just go to Harrisburg and do whatever the hell they want, and nobody's going to pay attention. Well, then you get people like myself, or some of the other candidates that went for this state rep, that are coming in and be like, hey, we're paying attention, and if you're not going to do your job, we're going to do it for you. As somebody who worked in retail, worked in these companies, if your employee is not doing their job, you give them a warning, and then if they still don't do it, you terminate them. Why should this be any different?
So let me go back to something we talked about earlier. What's the biggest, aside from not being present in the community? Give me two more reasons why Michelle Brooks should not be reelected.
Well, we've talked about the ultra focus. It's not just on the Lyme disease. Like she wants to work with firefighters, which is great. But how about we just start getting some more funding into the counties so we can pay our firefighters and emergency services workers?
Right. Nobody's ever lost an election being pro firefighter.
No, and that's the thing. And she does a lot of feel good bills, like making sure that these people are recognized, that we take a moment of silence on 9/11, which is a great thing to do. But like, how is that helping the community any more so than a little bit of camaraderie? If you really want to rally your constituents, help them, make sure that they are taken care of, that they can actually be with their families, be with their communities, and not have to worry about bureaucratic nightmares that is office, because you're doing your job. And the other thing is, she is getting to the point where she is borderline lifetime politician. Like, she was in Mercer County. She was on a borough council, and like I think it was close to almost out of college. Maybe it was a little after. And then she went up to the commissioner, and then she went to the House of or the state rep, and now she's a 2-term senator, going to be a 3rd-term senator if she, goes to run again. And it's like, you after so long, your perspective gets stale. Because like I even got a mailer in the mail, from her, her staff, saying like, oh, Lyme disease, firefighters, service animals for veterans. If you look back to, like, I want to say 2016, no, 2018. 2018 is about the same thing, just kind of slightly different. You change the words, you make it look a little bit better, and you shine it up real new, but it's the same crap you're pushing.
I was gonna say a lot of that stuff sounds familiar from when I was in the legislature, 10 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah, and because there's a lot of stuff that's just, you're right. Like, let's find feel good stuff, right? You're never going to go wrong trying to help veterans. You're never going to go wrong trying to help firefighters.
And that's the thing.
It's a lot of recycled stuff.
You can sit on these, like when you have that safe cushion of say 20,000 voters, that you're like, they would have to get a significant amount of voters or like people registered just to even contest with me, and you're not causing waves.
Right.
You can sit as a lifetime politician and just go. But it's getting to the point where like even like her own or the Republican constituents are noticing she's absent, like she's not around.
Well, it's interesting because I was looking at one of the things I think that legislative candidates need to do a lot more of, especially when you're running against an incumbent, is opposition research. And in terms of their, when you have someone like Michelle, who's again, like you said, has been in office forever, and there's a ton of votes. I was actually researching a bill for a future podcast I'm going to do about the public-private partnerships with PennDOT. And it was part of the transportation bill. And she voted, and I happen to have the roll call vote up on my computer, and I just checked it a second ago. She voted for it, right? That was a gas tax. So for everybody talking about, oh, gas is so expensive, and we get this idea,
Biden that.
Right. But Biden didn't do anything to raise your gas taxes, but Michelle Brooks did.
Yeah, she did.
And it's stuff like that where I think that we let them off the hook. Like I said, there's that dichotomy of what happens in Harrisburg, what happens at home, and we let them off the hook. And I think it's the challenger's job to make sure people know about that.
Oh, of course. And here's the thing: like we're in a rural district. They're trying to push that no carry gun legislation. You don't have to have a concealed carry permit. It's like you have to have a permit and a driver's license to operate a vehicle. You have to have a fishing license, a hunting license for turkey, deer, this, that, something else, just to go hunting. You have to have a permit to have your boat on the water. But yet we're trying to stop people from the age of 18 all the way up from having a concealed carry permit that like can do all this. Like
what could
possibly go wrong? Like,
right.
It's like, and it's just a waste of time because we're at this point in politics across the board, across the United States, where it's like they're gonna push it. They know it's not gonna work, but it's just a political stunt to make them look good or to hold their party, line or whatever. And it's the only people that it's hurting are the constituents that live in their districts. Plain and simple.
Yeah. Have you? So when it comes to getting kind of broader political support from stakeholders and stuff like that for your race, it's going to be a massive challenge just because of the nature of your district. They typically will only fund a handful of races every year. Everybody else kind of gets put on the pay no mind list, and you're left kind of floundering. Have you had any conversations with the Senate Democratic Campaign Committee or anybody?
Yes, I have. I had a conversation with Melanie Rose. She's got me, some system accesses and stuff. I have had conversation, and obviously, like I'm still going for my national support. So I'm doing the Working Families Party endorsements. I'm trying to go through and do my Vets for the People, Ignite. And then obviously Victory Fund because Sean Malloy, gotta love him.
Victor. Well, that was my next question. Victory Fund.
I already submitted that one, and I'm just waiting to hear back from it. But
do you think that that's probably going to? I'm assuming those groups like that would probably be a substantial source of your donations. What about organized labor? Have you had any talks with them? Have you gotten any commitments from them?
That's a little bit. That one was a little bit more confusing on my part. I had to ask a few questions on that one before I actually sent it in. I'm waiting to hear back on a few pro tips, so to speak.
Because it's interesting what happens, and this is a whole other podcast. The way Republicans, especially in Western PA, have kind of co-opted labor to their cause, and it has to deal with mineral extraction, and it's complicated. But there are a lot of really conservative Republicans who back in the day would have never gotten a penny from labor, are now getting the money and the endorsements over Democrats for a variety of reasons, and I'm curious to see how that shakes out this cycle.
Well, I mean,
I think it'll be very revealing.
I think that's where with me having such young and unique perspective on things, that's where I'm kind of like the wheels are turning. I've said about I want to go revamp the whole public school code. You know, it was created in 1948, and we've been making patches here and there where we see fit. I think we need a revamp where we actually take into consideration the amount of students who are going through the public school code. I say we go through and kind of close these loopholes that allow charter schools that are, getting public money from these students. That we have 3,000 students in a district or in a school district that are paying into the 500 that are doing a charter school, and it's just taking away from the funds from the kids who have to be there. And then obviously I want to look into healthcare, because like healthcare around here, especially prescription drug prices across Pennsylvania, that should be a no-brainer. But again, when you have the people in power who are being paid by the people who are making these prescriptions, that's what's going to happen. And the other, and then the last thing was I want to try and look at new and effective ways to revitalize the economy, and one of the ways was solar-powered roadways. We have so many roadways that are running in and across Pennsylvania, and we are a state that is touched by 5 or 6 other states that we could effectively, over a 10-year time. Yes, it's a little bit more upfront, but with this infrastructure bill coming in, why not? We start making our own energy. We can take some of these old rundown factories that are in, say, the 50th district or even in your district, to create and retrofit them to make these panels that then can maintain a temperature of, I think it's at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. They maintain a 41 degree Fahrenheit temperature. So there goes your ice. There goes your, heavy snow. They have a water filtration system. There's a clean and, clean drinking water. They have to run channels next to them. So you can take all of the wires that now, are above ground, put them below ground. And as you're doing it, run not broadband, but fiber optic internet across them, because the biggest thing with fiber optic is having a consistent power source. Guess what? Solar panels.
You're making way too much sense to be an elected official.
I know. I hear that way too much. I really do. People look at me and they're like, how have we not looked into this? I'm like, I'm looking into it now, and I'm not even an elected official. I've talked to some of the engineers and stuff, and they said it's very possible. Starting with a 3-tier plan, you start with some of those smaller areas that don't have as much traffic to see how they do over like a 6-month period. Then you move on to like your, smaller cities like Meadville or Corey. Not like Pittsburgh or Erie, but like something that has a little bit more traffic, but see how that goes for a 6-month period.
Ramp up.
And then like, even if it was across the 50th, we have 79 that runs straight up through. You put in a third lane that is strictly for, like a fast pass type thing, or even like truck drivers or whatever. See how it does the wear and tear, so it's not affecting the main roadways. Then switch over to it and open up that one as the main roadway, and repair 1 lane and have a 3-lane highway going up with, which is all solar powered energy.
None of that sounds horrible at all.
No, it doesn't. And here's the kicker on all of this, and this is the best part. If we actually ran it through Pennsylvania, then we can start taxing some of these gas and companies that are running through Pennsylvania. And when they decide to take an alternate route, we can export our energy to other states, so that way they can wean off some of the fossil fuels that are killing the world.
And yeah, and by doing what you just did, which was taking 5 minutes and giving real policy ideas and having actual things to talk with voters about. I mean, that's the most valuable thing you can do when you're at doors, is to show that you're a candidate of substance who's actually thought these things through. And, I think there's an inclination to basically be 3 walking bullet points. And I think the ability to get into the weeds a little bit and be a little wonkish is not a bad thing, because it's showing people you've actually thought some of these things through, and you're not just for sunshine and puppy dogs and fire departments,
But it's also that I have realistic and real life ideas that they can picture in their heads. So like Meadville, Corey, 79, these are things that they can see and be like, huh, that would work, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And it's funny because to kind of bring this all the way back around, to me, you were talking about education funding and the way, the cyber or you said charters, but to me it's cyber charters that are, that are really sucking money out of the districts and everything. And it was funny because I thought, as a parent, like that's the thing I care about more than, who's going in what bathroom, right? Like, or about critical race theory. Like, I care about, are my kids, we chose to live where we live based on, what the reputation of the school district was, what the funding level was, and all that kind of stuff. Like, those are real things that parents care about, and by talking about those, and when the other side's talking about these culture war garbage issues, it does give a Democrat an opening to kind of drive that wedge the other way, right? And say, no, we're talking about real policy here. They're talking about, bullshit that's not really a thing. And, and it's hard to do. It's hard to do that flip. But if you could pull it off, you leave the other side looking really stupid, which, I'm all for.
I do that more often than I'd like to admit. I really do. Honestly, I'd have somebody who's arguing with me in front of a small group of people, and I'll just be like, well, what about this, this, and this? And it just kind of negates everything that they're saying, and then the crowd just kind of gravitates over to me. It's fun.
Nice. I do. I like your kind of like dry, like your kind of like attitude to, it's kind of like a lot of candidates feel the need to like over explain and like get all jumpy and, like they can't get enough words in. And like, you're kind of just got this chill, like, I know what I'm talking about, like, and F it, you know what I mean? But in a good way, and sometimes I think that's a really good attitude to have when you're out there and, you're not over explaining, you're not over, sometimes you can just overdo it from a campaign point of view. And I think to be sometimes a little more understated is actually a really cool approach. So, very impressive.
Don't get me wrong. I could be long-winded when I need to be, but honestly, sometimes,
right. Well, we all can,
especially going through the campaign. I've really learned to like, really, if I can't tell you within, say, 1 minute what I stand for, the interviews, I go a little bit longer, a little bit more detail, kind of. That's how people hear it, because once they hear the 1 minute pitch, they'll go looking and be like, does this all line up? And then they'll see the podcast or the interviews that I do with media outlets.
Right. Right. No, it's a great way to open the door, but you're right. And so many candidates, it's just, they won't shut the hell up. I mean, you ask them one question and they talk for 46 minutes straight. You're like, all right, now can we get back to what we were originally talking about? And I think that there's sometimes an over reliance on policy, and it's difficult because I think there's a fine line. They have to know, I always say voters have to know you. They have to like you, and then they'll listen to your policies and make decisions based on that. But if they don't like you, then it doesn't matter how great your policies are. They're not having it, so it's a really fine line, and there aren't many candidates that can do it. When you first enter into politics, I mean, it's a really, I think it's a thing that's not talked about a lot, but just a kind of like the demeanor of candidates, what turns people off, how do you, a lot of times you could find the new candidate in the room very easily, and it's sometimes it's just a matter of not having someone around them to kind of coach them a little bit. Sometimes they just need that seasoning. But yeah, it's especially when you're running for something like state Senate, which is the next level up. People expect the senator to act a certain way and have a certain air about them. And it's a difficult thing to do.
And honestly, and my thing is, I won't ever say anything to you that I wouldn't say to my grandma. And the other thing is, but I also won't treat you any different than I would my best friend, because that's where the genuine conversation comes in, because we've been talking for an hour and 5 minutes, and it doesn't even seem like that long.
Right. That's always the thing. I'm like, oh, I'm going to try to do this in 45 minutes. And then like we go long. Well, so this is actually end up being 2 episodes.
I mean, but what I'm saying is, like, this is literally the first time I've met you in person. We've chatted over emails, but we just got into a conversation, and that's what it is. And this is what I try to bring to the table, is someone that's genuine and real. I have no problem saying, hey, what you're doing is messed up and you need to change it, because that's what the people deserve. And honestly, that's where I'm at with it.
Absolutely.
And I just subtly sprinkle in the little bits and pieces I need, you know?
Well, you've done a very effective job, but okay. Well, we're going to call it a day. I very much want to have you back at some point once you're further into the campaign, because I have a feeling you're going to have some bomb ass stories from the campaign trail.
I already do, but like this is a great intro. I do appreciate it.
If I could give you a piece of advice, and I don't know if you do this already or not, keep a journal. Take some time every night. You know, when you're out there meeting people or whatever, you're going to have these wonderful little vignettes that have happened. Yeah. And because
I got it,
you're going to, I have a feeling that you're going to want to write something after this is all over because of just the uniqueness of the experience. And you know, it's one of those things where you always think you're going to remember and then everything kind of fades into the ether. So yeah, I think you'll really appreciate having a good record as you go through.
And I mean to end this out, like,
yeah,
I've been in front of crowds. Crowds is no problem to me. I mean, you know, I'm not quite sure exactly how many followers you have, but I've been on quite a few that like people like just hear me talk and I get the reaction from it. But the real shock and awe comes from people like I had I'm gonna do a little name drop in here.
Yeah, go for it.
Like I met with Lisa Middleton on a Zoom call. She's running to be the first state senator out in California as a transgender individual. I've talked with obviously like Dr. Tyler Titus. They are amazing. I appreciate everything that they do. That's where the shock and awe comes in for me. Is when like and then Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, State Rep Malcolm Kenyatta. They're great. I met them once. I think it was at an Erie Dems picnic, and we just hit it off. And I love them so much. So I shout out to them. But those are the.
What about Sarah McBride? Have you ever spoken with Sarah McBride?
Working on that. I am. Christy Ganibas. Yeah. She told me I met her when actually just recently. It was when the Attorney General came up to Erie for his announcement in Erie. I met Christy Ganibas. She was so great. She was amazing, and we had a nice talk. But it's those type of people that like they see me and they're like, "Hey, I know who you are." Like I'm like, "You do?"
It's a weird thing as you're running for office. People, you realize that people start to pay attention to you more than you realize, and it is a humbling and terrifying thing all at once because you realize that the words you say actually reverberate out and people actually listen to them. And it's the one piece of advice I'll give is when people start coming up to you and saying, do you remember who I am? You know, just like constituents, whatever. I always used to just say no, because it's like, you know, we're going to try to get cute. Be like, no, I don't remember. Help me out. And then be like, you know, instead of trying to play the gotcha game. And for those, just to backtrack, Sarah McBride, for those who don't know, was the Delaware Democrat who became the first trans person elected to a state Senate back in 2020. So that was why I kind of name dropped her.
I am working on it though. I have a few contacts that are kind of pushing a few things around. So, but
very cool. And I imagine once your campaign gets, you know, more active and up and running, you know, as we move into the cycle, you'll probably, you know, I think those contacts will, you know, they'll be coming to you as well.
And I mean, you know,
for support.
Stuff like this helps too. I really do appreciate it. This helps me get my name out.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so speaking of getting your name out, give everybody your information. I'm going to put it in the show notes, but give everybody your website information. And I'll have your Act Blue in there for anybody that wants to donate or anything like that.
I appreciate it. It's most places it's Check for Senate. Instagram is Ria for PA Senate. And then my website, we're still working on the update on that. So if you want to go to my website, just check it out on my Facebook page. It's still under the Wix name, but we definitely are working on that.
And Czech is CZECH, like Czech
like
Republic.
the country. All of my information is out up there. But I would appreciate if you'd like to volunteer, please just reach out to me. My email's on my Facebook and my Instagram. And if you would, please donate. It helps out every little bit here and there to get me elected to be the 50th District's next state senator.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time, Rianna Czech, candidate for the 50th State Senate District. And I'm sure we are going to check back in with you because this is going to be a fun one to watch.
I appreciate it. Thank you.